Okay, welcome everybody. Hope it's going well for you today. Oh, I've got the wrong date there. It's not the 24th of November. Today is the 24th of March. There we go. That's more like it. All right. So this is class 25, and just as a reminder, we only get through 38 this semester due to a couple of cancellations and so on. So, after today's class meeting, we've only got 38 more class activities through the semester. So we're definitely getting through. Your next homework assignment, number 9, which has to do with the ideas that we're starting to introduce in last Monday's class and then continuing today, that next homework assignment should be uploaded before noon to Blackboard on Monday the 29th of March. And then, of course, the ever-present reminder about the project. That's 15% of your course grade, and I've said before that you won't do well on the project if you procrastinate. And if you don't get started early, it's just too much to think about in a single sitting. There's too much analysis, too much planning, too much unknown stuff that needs to be figured out. And so the solution to procrastination is just begin. It's to start today. Begin your research, begin your writing, begin your analysis. And if you have questions about either of those, the assignment or the project, please let me know. Today we're going to continue talking about benefit cost analysis. Now this is the extension of the tools we've said that we have to have in order to evaluate projects that don't turn a profit, where all of our previous methods maybe aren't applicable because we're considering projects that have more value just than returning dollars to shareholders. There's maybe a higher ideal or some other aspect of the project that appeals to us besides its capacity to generate money. So we're going to continue talking about that today. And today's activity is a little bit complicated. So here's what I suggest. We're going to go through an in-class exercise. Be sure and save the Excel file that you use because you'll want to come back to it as you're working through the homework. And if you get to a homework assignment and you're confused, part of that might be that you didn't engage with the in-class exercise to the extent that you could have. Or part of that, if you get to a homework assignment and you're confused, maybe the problem is that when you were confused during the lecture, you were too bashful to ask a question. So my point in raising that is that if you have a question as we're going through it today, please give me the opportunity to answer it now, because it's going to be so much easier for us to figure this out now while we're together and working on an activity than for me to get an email on Sunday night where you just say, I don't get it. And then I don't know what part of it you don't understand, and you haven't asked a specific question. And so, we're going to go through an example today that is really closely applicable to the homework assignment. And if you get hung up on a certain thing today, let's sort it out today. All right. So with that said, in incremental analysis, we've got multiple alternatives. On Monday, we were considering situations where there was just a single alternative that was being evaluated, and our decision criteria there, how we knew if an alternative was acceptable or unacceptable, was that the benefits should be more than the costs. In other words, the ratio of benefits in the numerator and costs in the denominator should be greater than 1. And when it's greater than 1, what that means is you're getting more than $1 of value for every $1 of cost. So we'll look at the formula, the specific formula to B2C ratio again today, but that first assessment was just initial screening. It was a yes or a no on projects, and so sometimes we have more than one alternative, and we have to have some method available to help us pick which alternative is best. Now there's an analogy here. You may remember that when we were doing internal rates of return, like if you have many projects and you calculate the internal rate of return, it's not necessarily the project with the highest IRR that is the best project. Do you remember the illustration we did with that, where we proved that what you really want to do is maximize profit in the case of a for-profit project? And so just choosing the project with the highest IRR doesn't give you the best project. And so one of the ways that we did it back then was we did an incremental internal rate of return analysis. So that was back then, and what I'm saying is there's a similar situation now where you can't just compare the B2C ratio of multiple projects and choose the one that has the highest ratio, because you're not trying to maximize the ratio necessarily. What you're trying to do is capture as much benefit as is cost effective. I'll give that a moment to sink in. And let me explain it another way. If I offered you a trade, and the trade was, if you give me $1, I give you $1.10, would you take that trade? Hopefully you're nodding your head, or at least thinking, yes, you should take that trade, because if I take $1 and give you $1.10, you're getting more than you spent. Now, in the case of public works projects, where we're evaluating them by the B2C method, our multiple alternatives decision criteria is keep spending money as long as the benefits are greater than the costs. And specifically, I mean, as long as the incremental benefits are greater than the incremental cost. Now, let me talk about the pictures here. The picture on the far left is probably familiar to anybody who spent time in Huntington. This is a flood wall. It's a way of providing protection to people on the right side of the wall. You can see that the river's on the left. On the right side of the wall is where people live. And so that's flood protection measure. Another way of providing flood protection is to elevate structures so that whatever is of value is above where the water line is likely to be. So hopefully this isn't their permanent solution. Hopefully this is just a temporary solution while they jack up a building and put it onto more firm supports. But if you've been into flood-prone areas, including in coastal Florida and other places, sometimes you can see houses that are essentially built on stilts. So this is another way of flood-proofing. And finally, this picture is a photo of a pump station where in places like New Orleans, where much of the inhabited city is below the average sea level, they have to keep the water back with a series of levees and dams, and then they always have to pump out water to make sure that the water level stays low. So you can do more than one thing to provide protection against flooding. You can have a flood wall and elevated structures and pumps. And so in the case of multiple alternatives, sometimes you want to do one thing and another and the third thing, and the analysis that you do is you try and find out how is the next most expensive alternative compared to the one before it that was acceptable. And so if it was a mutually exclusive alternative, if this was the cheapest and then elevating all of the homes in town was the next most expensive alternative, and then finally there was the pumping station, let's say that all three options pass the initial screening, that their B2C ratio is all greater than 1. So if we were going to pick just one, we would want to choose whichever one was the most expensive and where the incremental benefit was outweighing the incremental cost. And so that's the explanation. We're going to get into the specifics of the spreadsheet procedure today, but I wanted to give you kind of an overview of what we were doing and why. We're going to use incremental analysis to compare alternatives. Now here's the formula for the B2C ratio. Remember, B stands for benefits, and that's where what we've done is we've turned things that may not necessarily be related to money, we've turned it into money. So we've turned a reduction in delay into money, or we've turned an improvement in safety performance into its dollar value, and we've turned recreational opportunities from enjoyment into a dollar equivalent. And we'll leave that conversion up to the economists, but we'll just accept that there's some way to quantify and monetize benefits, and that's what we represent by B in this formula. D is the disbenefits, and disbenefits refer to things like noise, pollution, delay, or the visual ugliness of seeing a wind turbine up on the ridgeline. All of the things that are negatives that arise from a project likewise need to be monetized and converted into a dollar basis. And then remember that if we're going to be doing a ratio, that not only do these all need to be expressed as dollars, but it also needs to be in the same time frame. And so everything needs to either be at the present, or everything needs to be at the future, or everything needs to be expressed on an annual basis. Okay, in the denominator are the costs. C sub I is the initial construction costs, and it may be that those construction costs span over a couple of years. If it's a really big project, it may take a couple of years of construction, but we're just talking about the capital infrastructure costs of establishing whatever the thing is, whereas C, M, and O is maintenance and operations costs that are an annual series that then we have to move to the same time frame as everything else. In incremental analysis, we're going to transform this formula. Instead of just putting in the benefits and the disbenefits and so on, we will look at the increment between two alternatives. So we'll have option B minus option A. Remember when we did the incremental analysis before, where we had this column by column matchup of alternatives? We'd have a head-to-head, and we'd find the difference in cost where we had the more expensive thing minus the cheaper thing. And so we will substitute in the incremental benefits between the two, the incremental disbenefits between the two, and so on and so forth. So here's the substitution of the formula. You can see that it's the same formula as B2C ratio. We've just said that we'll find the difference between the two alternatives. And our decision criteria here is that when the incremental benefit to cost ratio is greater than 1, then the more expensive alternative should be selected, because you're getting more than $1 of benefit for each incremental increase in cost. And that's what you want. You want $1.10 of value for having paid $1. It could be anything over the 1. But when it's less than 1, what that means is that the more expensive alternative of the two is not justified, and then the cheaper of the alternatives should remain the go-to solution that any further alternatives are compared against. So any questions so far about these concepts? I hope this is seeming familiar because of the incremental analysis we did before. All right, so let's open up the in-class exercise for today and take a look at what we've got. Okay, so we have a couple of alternatives. We've got option A, B, C, and D. And you can see that I've already kind of sorted them in terms of the cheapest to the most expensive alternative. And all of these different alternatives are related to constructing a dam, different dam types, different dam sizes. And so if you build a small one, then you'd get relatively less benefits each year. So you can see the benefits that you're getting for this small project are less than the large project, gives you more benefits, and there's less disbenefits. And so we don't know something about the projects themselves, but we have the quantified value. I do have a template file I can email you, although this spreadsheet isn't particularly complicated. I can send you the template just to avoid a little bit of formatting to begin with. Let me dig that up right now and I'll send it your way. Seth's got it. So the first thing we want to know is which alternative is best, but that's a step-by-step procedure. And so The first part of that is determining the present worth of everything, because you can see some of these are on an annual basis. We want to know the initial cost is already in the present, but everything else is annualized. And so we have to remember how to do that in Excel, how to find the present value. Chad's having a little trouble opening his, but Seth's got it. If you, Chad, if you can't get it to open, that's fine. There's nothing really too fancy about this template file. Oh, I wish I hadn't typed in these values for you. All right, so let's see. In the assignment description, it says that the project lifespan is 75 years, and it's a 6% discount rate. So I think you can see in the template file where those pieces of data goes, that our MAR is 0.06 and our project life is 75 years. All right, so this is just the given data. The first step is we want to do a present worth calculation. And so the present worth of option A's initial cost. So C sub I. Well, that's already in the present. So we can just say equals and click on the location where that existing data is. Okay, so same thing with B. Equals, click on location B, and rather than keeping to do that, we could just drag the formula down and it'll reflect the relative reference to the cells above it. Okay, so this data is already in present, but everything else is annual. So do you remember what function you use to turn something that's annual into a present value using Excel? It's been a while maybe since you used that function. PMT actually finds the annual for either a present or a future. So it's not the PMT function. We want to find the present value, so it's just equals PV, and that returns the present value. So equals PV. Let me zoom in a little bit, so hopefully it's large enough to see. I may not be able to do that while I'm in the function though. So zoom in a little more. All right, so all we're doing is finding the present worth of these. Okay, so equals PV. Okay, now it's asking for the rate, the number of years, and then it's asking for what amount is the recurring payment. Now, oftentimes when we use the PV function, we skip over that third field, right? But this time, that's where this is supposed to go, because what it is it's 52,075 years in a row. So we want to turn this annual series of 52,000 every year into the present equivalent. So that's not a one-time future value like we often put into the PV function, but that truly is a recurring payment we're trying to find the lump sum present value of. Okay, so for the present value, if you haven't already, you click on this location for the interest rate and then anchor that reference with F4. Okay. And then comma, NPER is saying the number of periods. And so how many of the 52,000s is it going to be taking to the present? And so that's referring to this 75 years. And again, I'm going to anchor the reference there by pressing F4. Okay, next, it's saying what is the payment? The recurring annual amount. And remember, we have to put the minus sign when we use these built-in financial functions in Excel because of the assumed change in magnitude, direction, where Excel thinks that if you have given it an inflow, it should find an outflow and vice versa. We don't want it to do that. So minus of this amount. Okay, so it tells me that a single lump sum equivalent of 52,000 every year for 75 years, that lump sum equivalent is $855,704. Okay, now look at how we've referenced things. What is anchored with the dollar sign And so what we ought to be able to do is just drag that formula down through the remainder of the options, and it'll find the present worth of each alternative. If you're hung up on a certain thing, I'm begging you, please ask a question now, because it's so much better for us to get on the same page while we're doing this activity and kind of have the ability to interact live. Okay, so I dragged that down. Show the reference again. Yes, absolutely. So here's the formula. The rate is 6%. NPER is 75. And then in the third field, for the payment field, I'm referring to the minus of the maintenance and operation cost. I wish there was a way for me to make this formula text a little bit larger, but as yet I haven't found a simple and straightforward way to make this part a little bit larger. All right. So now what we know, remember the reason why we're doing this is we want to have everything so that we want to find the conventional B2C ratio for these four options. Let's do some initial screening and see if all of the projects are potentially suitable, just to begin with. Okay, so we've done the costs. Now we need to do the benefits. There's three different benefits. There's flood protection, fire control, and recreation. Rebecca's not getting this. Well, did you put in 6 or 0.06 in the percentage? Yes, anchoring is important. Okay. When in doubt, throw it out. That's my motto. So if you're getting the wrong answer, just start over completely. And that's what I'll do. Just for this one, for instance, look, if I press delete, it eliminates it. So equals PV, and extra comma. So what I was going to say is sometimes you can just try typing the numbers themselves in. So 0.06, comma, 75, comma, negative 52,000, and see if you get what you're expecting that way. So that's the same 855,704. Now it's better to have the reference to the interest rate and the N, rather than typing it into the formula. It's better to use these, because then if you need to make a change, everything gets dynamically updated. So what I'll do is I'll drag that back up so that now it is referred to the formula. Okay, so let's do the benefits now. I want to show you something. We don't have to do 3 separate benefit fields. We're finding the present worth. These are annual. So we're going to do equals PV once again. Okay, the rate is 6%. So click up there on 6% and anchor the reference. Comma. NPER is again just the number of years. Anchor that by pressing F4. Comma. All right. Now, in the payment field, we're going to embed a function within a function. Let's give this a try, because what I want to do is I want to add together the flood, the fire, and the annual protection. Rather than doing that someplace else, I want to build that into the function. So I'm going to say, in the payment field, I'm going to say equals minus sum of, and then I'm going to highlight these 3 things together. Let's see if that works. And so do you understand, in the sum function, that's adding it together, and the minus sign, just because of the change in direction that Excel assumes, I need to put in 1 more parentheses. Okay, so let me try enter, and let's see if it has combined these 3 things together, and then it's taken it from an annual back to the present. Oh, it doesn't like what I've done. It's probably the minus sign. If I take the minus sign out, see if it likes that more. No, still doesn't like that. All right, so we'll do the, instead of the sum function, we'll do this. Parentheses, this plus that plus that. Maybe a little bit less elegant. And then I need to have the minus sign in there. Okay, maybe that'll go a little bit smoother. There it is, yes. And that's the correct amount. Okay, so the way that we can check it, of course, is that we could just over here say, here's the sum of the annual benefits. So the sum of the benefits is that plus that and recreation. So what we're effectively doing is we're finding out what is the present worth of 650,000. Oh, sum function without the equal sign. Yeah, probably that's what it is. Sometimes when you're, you can't see the forest for the trees. And so let's give that a try down here. Let's say equals PV of the rate. Okay, so 6% with the F4 anchoring the N value. All right, and then instead of the equal sign, I'll just do sum of, oh, but I want minus sum. So the minus sum of these three. Parentheses, parentheses. There it is. Thanks for the tip, Seth. You're right. We didn't need that equal sign. You already knew it was a function. Okay, so then I can drag that down. By the way, this little, the green triangle thing, that's just a warning of Excel is noticing that these formulas are different from the one that was above it. So it's just a warning because I was using this formula and then I switched to a different formula style. I think that if I drag that all the way up through all of them, then the warning is still there. Formula omits adjacent cells. That's all right. Those are the values that we want. Sometimes Excel has got an overactive imagination. All right, now disbenefits. It's easy because there's just a single group of those. Present value, 6% interest rate. Project life is 75 years, and minus of the disbenefits. Okay. So we do it for all four alternatives. And now let's do the conventional B2C ratio for each of these. So here's our formula. So the conventional B2C says it should be the benefits minus the disbenefits divided by the initial costs plus the maintenance and operation costs. All of those are in the same time frame. That's all present worths, and so that's why we're able to now make a ratio out of it. So option A has a ratio of 1.80. So that is potentially suitable. It passes the initial screening. That's good. We can drag this formula down and find out what is the B2C ratio for all of the alternatives. Reminder to save your work, that this will be useful to come back to and look at later. Now what I told you is you can't just pick the one that has the highest B2C. So I'm going to put like an interpretation. All of them are acceptable. But in my interpretation, I'm not saying which one is best, because you can't pick which one is best just from the B2C ratio. To pick which one is best, we have to do now the incremental analysis. Okay, so you'll notice I just have this empty because you don't know what the matchups are going to be at the beginning. You just know like the first pair. And so the first pair is B versus A. So I'm going to type that in. It's going to be B versus A as the first comparison. How do you get the B to C? All right, let me go to the formula there. It's benefits minus disbenefits in the numerator, and then in the denominator it is the costs of the initial and the costs maintenance operation. So we just used this formula. So in other words, let me go ahead and type it for this one. It is parentheses benefits minus disbenefits parentheses divided by cost plus cost. Other questions so far? Nick's asking, what do you compare the B to C to know if it's acceptable or not? Good question. Acceptable since B to C is greater than 1. Rebecca asks to see column D. These ones? If it's exactly 1, it's acceptable. But you want to have a little bit of a margin of error, because like at the beginning of a project, people are notorious for underestimating how expensive it's going to be and overestimating how much benefits are going to accrue. So yes, a B2C ratio of 1 means you can accept the project, but take that with a grain of salt, because people might have inflated their benefits numbers and been too optimistic about what the cost would genuinely be. All right, let me left justify that so we can see the full note here, that if it is, since it's greater than 1, and that same thing applies for all of these. They're acceptable. Oh, not 2. It's counting for it automatically. Silly Excel. All right, so they're all potentially acceptable. So our first matchup is B versus A. Any further questions before we do that first incremental analysis? All right, so the incremental costs. How much more expensive is option B than option A? So it's the cost of B minus the cost of A. So option B is an extra $780,000 in present terms. So this is the incremental present worth cost. The initial cost, how much more expensive is B? And the same thing, we're going to do this incremental for all of the options. And so I can do a relative reference. I don't have to type this formula over and over. I can just click down here at the bottom where I've got that thick green box. I can click and drag sideways only this far. Don't go to the next one. Some people on the test are going to be tempted to calculate the incremental benefit cost by doing like this minus that, and that's not right. Just the delta cost, delta maintenance and operation, delta benefits, delta disbenefits. The reason why I don't want you to drag one more further, that's wrong, because our ratio should use these values. So the delta B to C, we're going to apply this formula, but with the delta values. Now, what does that mean? Minus 987,000. So the incremental cost, you have the more expensive one minus the cheaper one. So it's B minus A. All right, so now what about this one though? Does it make sense that it's negative? What that means is that you have fewer disbenefits with option B. So it should be negative. All of these other things, so B is more expensive. B has more maintenance and operation costs. It has more benefits, and since it has fewer disbenefits, because it's a better thing, whatever it is, it's a better thing, then this minus that is going to be a negative value. So don't be thrown off by the fact that that's negative. That's perfectly fine for it to be. It doesn't have to be, but it also makes sense if it is negative. It wouldn't make sense if the incremental cost was negative, because then that would mean you subtracted in the wrong order. All right, so parentheses delta benefits minus delta disbenefits. So, since it's minus of a negative number, that's going to be kind of like we're adding the two things together. So that's our numerator divided by the incremental cost on the initial basis and the maintenance and operation. Close parentheses. Now, I need to change the formatting of that. It says $3, but it's not currency, it's a ratio. So I'm going to change it to no specific format. That's too many decimals. That's just kind of cluttered. So let me reduce it maybe to that many. That looks better. 2.57. So what's the interpretation? Anybody willing to go out on a limb? Is option B worth doing? Should we do option B or should we stick with option A? Aaron and Cameron say B. Everybody's saying B. Brett, why would we do option B? You're correct that B is better, but what's the rationale? What's the decision criteria that tells you should go for option B? Brett? Feel free to use the microphone if you like.
Is it because the conventional B2c is greater than 1?
Okay, yep. It's the rule is anytime the incremental benefit cost is greater than 1, then you choose the more expensive alternative. So that's right. So it's for the same reason. Since the delta B to C is greater than 1, choose the more expensive alternative. But why? But why? It's because for every dollar of added cost, you're getting $2.57 of benefit. I like that exchange. Option B is more expensive, yes, but for each additional dollar you spend on option B compared to option A, you're getting $2.57 of benefit. So it's kind of like, someone who is thinking about buying equipment. And one piece of equipment is more expensive than the other, but maybe you can do more with it. And so it's justified. And the same thing is true here. Option B is justified because its extra cost is more than outweighed by the extra benefits. There's a huge disparity in favor of the benefits. Okay, so now what's our next matchup? Our next matchup is C versus B. It's not C versus A because we've already moved on from A. Okay, A is dead to us. B is our new winner, our new champion. So it's going to be C versus A. No, B. C versus B. Okay, so now incremental. C minus B. And we'll drag it sideways just as far as the disbenefits. Okay. So it's a little more expensive. Well, a lot more expensive. $3 million more. It's got some more benefits. All right, we can't tell just by looking. We got to calculate the value. So let's see. Could we just drag that down from the previous one? I think we can. We don't have to type that formula in again since it's all relative references to the cells that are to the left. We can just drag this one down. And it doesn't look good for option C. It's a lot of extra cost for just a little bit of extra benefit. So our interpretation here is since the delta B to C is less than 1, reject the more expensive alternative. If it yields 1, does it matter which you pick? I guess it doesn't matter. But what I'll promise you is that on no homework and no exam will you ever have a tie like that. It'll always be more clear-cut than exactly 1. and probably in the real world too. All right, so what's our last matchup? Anyone? We rejected. Go ahead, what was that? D versus B. Very good. So our last matchup, D versus B. Okay. So equals more expensive minus the less expensive. Here's the formula for the delta BC. We're applying this, but we're using the deltas rather than just the original straight benefits, disbenefits, and so on. So it's the delta BC does not refer to these. The delta BC refers to these, right? Yeah, we can. Okay, so we've got this, our incremental cost. Now we're going to have the incremental maintenance and operation, the incremental benefit, incremental disbenefit. So just dragging sideways, we'll do the calculation. Oh, I've got a good feeling. Look at all that juicy improvement in disbenefit. And look at that, incremental benefits on the order of more than 5 million. I hope it works out. So we've got that formula from before. We can just drag it down from above. It's greater than 1. So since the delta B to C is greater than 1, choose the more expensive alternative, which is option D. So, conclusion, which alternative is best? Option D. Option D is the best alternative. And look, we never would have guessed it, right? Because it had the lowest B to C ratio. It had the lowest B to C ratio. If we had just picked based on maximizing B to C, we would have missed out on a lot of added benefit. Anytime someone's going to exchange more than $1 of benefit for $1 of cost, you should keep taking that deal until what they're willing to give you is less than what they're asking in cost. All right, so here to the handout, we've selected which alternative was best and how we knew. What is the highest interest rate that could be used and still have an alternative that is acceptable? That's interesting. So what that's saying is, what if we change the interest rate? Like, if we couldn't borrow money as cheaply as we had hoped, how high can interest rates go and still have an acceptable alternative? So here are the alternatives. This is where we did the interpretation to find if one of them is acceptable. So if we have 8% interest, 0.08, by the way, before we change this, oh, I shouldn't have done that, Control Z. I'm going to create a copy of this. So down at the bottom, right click, move or copy, create a copy, and then I'm going to have this one be where I changed the interest rate. Okay, so it preserves this, which was at 6%, and now an identical copy where I can play around with the interest rate and not mess up my first tab. Okay, 0.08. Yeah, we still have an acceptable alternative. 10%. 12%. Okay, now look, some of these alternatives are not feasible if interest rates go up. So although we really like option D, over here, we really liked option D, it depends on low interest rates. So option D is only feasible if you can borrow money at less than 12%. It's already dropped out of the running. So it looks like probably option B is going to be the one that holds on the longest. So what I'm going to do now is a goal seek. So data, what if analysis, goal seek. And what I want to find out is I want this ratio to be 1 by changing the interest rate. And so when I say OK, it's going to keep changing the interest rate over and over and over again until it finds what's the highest interest rate that can still give me an acceptable alternative. And there it is. You could have, let me show more decimals there, 14.5%. So you could fill that in on the paper as well. We're out of time. It's 12:50. We've done it. We successfully learned about incremental B2C analysis. So what you should be doing now is solve that homework assignment. You know plenty. You can get that done early on and then focus the rest of your attention onto making some progress with the project. That's it for today, everybody. Hope you have a good one. I will see you in class on Friday.